Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rav Shmuel, Rabbi Stephen, Rav Shmuel ben Yehoshua, Rashbi, with you with this week's Torah Parashat, Devar Torah. And as you see, we're in beautiful San Clemente. And here's my shirt that was given to me as a birthday present. Psalm, 119, verses 33 to 35. And thank you, Mary, for the birthday present. Certainly appreciate it. So we had a real interesting weekend the other weekend. Of course, we had Friday and Saturday morning services, and we're kind of doing a little bit quicker service, not as much discussion, but just kind of going through it, kind of still going slow because I like to do the service in Hebrew, but I also like to go slow enough so that people who are not familiar with the Hebrew, which is practically a lot of us, can follow along in the English as I go through the Hebrew. Now, the sages have said, and there's of course a difference of opinion on this, as there always is, that when you pray in Hebrew, even though you may not know what you're saying a lot of the time, God does, and you get divine credit for the prayers and everything. Other rabbis have said, well, that may or may not be the case. Still, you pray in your native language, so you do understand what you're doing. So give or take a little bit. Me, I always like to find the middle ground. And again, people are listening to the Hebrew while they're reading the English. They're getting the best of both, or Spanish, or whatever your native language is. You're getting the best of both worlds. And I like that idea. So we are continuing with our Adult Hebrew 2, as I call it, and we are going through the upcoming Torah portion, the triennial, and we're going through the Hebrew. And it's a way to really hone in and read the Hebrew now that a lot of you folks have gone ahead and gone through the elementary or basic Hebrew course and you're familiar with the letters and the vowels and such. So we're doing that. But this Sunday was really kind of a jam-packed, fun day in my mind. The sisterhood had their women's breakfast. They invited some of us men in. But then we, the men, went into the sanctuary and we had our little Tefillin Wrap. Pictures are available. I posted some of them on Facebook. I'm going to put them on the synagogue website, my website. You know, it's a really big thing, especially since a lot of the folks had never put on tefillin. They're, in the process of becoming Jewish. And that, of course, begs the question, well, don't you need to be Jewish to put on tefillin? Well, yes. However, using the idea that somebody who is 6 months away from their bar mitzvah can be called up for a maftir, kind of like a practice, especially since the maftir isn't technically part of the 7 aliyot for witnessing the Torah, I'm thinking, okay, people want to be Jewish. This is a way to kind of introduce them to some of the things that we do. And then we had some women come and do that. Another controversial act, according to some people. They say women should not put on tefillin, to which I say, well, tell me why they shouldn't. Here's the Torah, show me. And people will say, well, women have that thing that happens every month and there's an open wound. And okay, but when there's not, why not? And the idea, and let's talk about that briefly before we go into this week's Devar Torah, is that women are actually on a higher spiritual plane. They are. They give birth. They create life the same way God, Hashem, creates life. And the reason why women have the role of bearing children and giving life is because they're on a higher moral ground. They don't have the same lusts that men do, the same passions, and they're not driven or slaves to it. They have a higher moral ground. They can see the morality, and that's why women are charged. Their role is to bring up kids and instill social values. That's what it is. That's the way we believe. Okay, so, let's get on to our Torah portion, Ki Teitzei, when you go out to war. So Judaism is a very moral religion. We highlight morality and ethics. God expects us in the covenant. I will give you a great reward, but there are great demands that I'm going to place on you. Look at the way our people have survived, under the worst oppression this world, our human species, has inflicted on anybody for an extended period of time. And yet here we are, because God's protecting us. Yes, there have been some tragedies, and there have been a lot of deaths along the way, but as a people, we still exist. Why? Because we subscribe to a higher morality. Honor the stranger, right? Things like that. When you go out to war, God expects things of us. Yes, war can sometimes be a necessity. Bad, horrible, but it's true. It happens. And when you do not give up that morality. The camp has to be clean, which means you have your latrine outside the camp, right? If a soldier is in a heat of passion, he sees a woman that he thinks he's attracted to, well, there are certain steps. You can't just have your way with her. There are certain things you need to do. And by the way, if you're that entranced with her, then there might be a marriage that results, okay? And if a marriage does result, and at that time people were allowed multiple wives, then whoever your firstborn is your firstborn. Whichever wife it is, you do not get to choose that. Yes, it is a response to what happened with Esau and Jacob, and Ishmael and Isaac. Now we look back on it and we think, okay, the right person got the firstborn, got the inheritance, but still, that's why you have to now be careful with who you choose as a mate. What happens if the son is incorrigible, rebellious son, right? There are, and people's jaws have dropped when we discuss the consequences of a kid that goes off the deep end and steals money to indulge his desire for alcohol and food. There's some very dire consequences to that, but it's a warning. Never happened. It's a warning. And all this leads from what happens if you choose the wrong woman to be your wife. So make sure you choose wisely. That's a lesson. Now let's talk about what happens in our triennial portion, okay? They talk about a person who is found dead between two cities. What do? Well, the elders of each city will measure the distance, and whichever city is closer has the responsibility, not really of finding the murderer, but basically of absolving themselves of the fact that they let this person go out in danger by themselves rather than escort them. Remember the flow of our Torah. We have the Shema and the V'ahavta, right? Which is the individual responsibility to do the commandments. Then we had the second. In the next portion, we had the second paragraph of the Shema, which is the whole group, right? The group of us were responsible for each other. Then we had the idea of what happens if a city reverts into idolatry. What happens there? Again, we're all responsible for each other. We are a community. We are a society. Now, somebody's passing through. They're a traveler, and their dead body, their corpse, is found between the two cities. And what the sages have to do, they have to go out, look at the body, axe the back of the neck with a calf, which means decapitated it, that's shechita, which is interesting because people say, well, where'd they get the idea of the shechita, the cutting the throat of the animal so it feels no pain and dies instantly? There are some references to doing that in the Torah, axing the back of the neck. That's basically the euphemism for doing that. And then there's washing your hands in the blood to say we are hereby taking responsibility that it was not our responsibility, that we didn't know, and we have no blame on this. Now some of the sages again say, well, yeah, you did. Why didn't you escort that person out? And that's why you have to do an offering to make atonement for the fact that you did not accompany that person, that you did not try to ensure their safety. So again, responsibility for each of us. And Moses, remember the context. Moses is charging this new generation of Israel that will go into the promised land will conquer it and settle it and set up a society with courts. Remember, we talked about that. So it all fits together. It's all pieces of the puzzle. And this is who we are. We are a moral and ethical people, and we want to look out for each other. And it's not just us. How many Jewish philanthropies, charities, also help non-Jewish people? We do that. There was a song when I was a kid, and I'll end with this. No man is an island, no man stands alone. Each man's joy is joy to me. Each man's unhappiness is my own. And think about that. If we cared that much about each other, think about how much better this world would be. Shabbat Shalom.